Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a new segment of the show on the channel that we probably will get a few episodes out of at least after this one. And I think once we start talking a little bit about it, you'll realize why. This is all about our favorite Mellotron albums. You're obviously here because you are a prog fan, because I don't think too many metal fans are really give a shit about Mellotrons at all. But us prog fans, we certainly do. And I figured, gee, who can I get to help out on an episode like this? Yeah, Ken Golden, the professor of prog, Scot Lade from the Prog Corner. This is the trio. We're going to talk about Mellotron. We've each picked out our 10 of our favorite albums, because originally we were going to do one episode. We were going to pick our 10 favorites, but then we realized there's so many damn great classic albums featuring lots of Mellotron that we probably could do a number of episodes here and not even scratch the surface of all the great Mellotron albums. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to periodically do another episode of this and talk about more Mellotron. So today we've picked out 10. These might be some of our favorites. We might, in fact, Ken, I'm sure will mention it. There's some Holy Grail albums that we may or may not mention, right? You know what they are. Maybe some of us will, some won't. We'll see. But we're probably going to get fairly obscure. So if those of you who are watching are like, oh, they're going to talk about King Crimson and Genesis and Yes and all the usual suspects, we might. But we're going to talk about a lot of other stuff that falls way under the radar, I think. So
I would imagine at some point, Pete Pardo, Foxtrot will get mentioned. I'm pretty sure Close to the Edge or Tales from Topographic Oceans or In the Court of the Crimson King, might get a little brief mention, but there's so much to go over. This is going to be just awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, how do you argue the which is better, Selling by the Pound, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, relative to Mellotron? It's like it's all great.
That's the thing, because there are some bands that have the Mellotron featured heavily on 4, 3, 4, 5, 6 of their albums. It's like, and which one is better than the other, right? That's for sure. Because we could have done a whole episode just on King Crimson and Genesis alone, when you really think about it, or like the Mighty Blues or whatever. But there's a lot of other bands that only maybe released 1 or 2 albums back in the early mid 70s. That, I mean, there's more Mellotron on those albums than all the Genesis ones put together, right? That's kind of the way it works. So hopefully we will uncover a lot of these in these episodes. So we've each picked 10. We're not going to do honorable mentions because we're going to save for each episode. We'll do 10, so we'll cover a lot of ground, however many episodes we squeeze into this. So we're going to do 2 at a time. So we'll start with Ken. We'll go Ken, Scott, and myself 2 at a time. We'll go round and round until we go through our 10. So
perfect.
Turn it over to you, Ken.
So is this a good time for me to tell my Mellotron story?
Yes, tell your Mellotron story.
I'll get the Mellotron story out of the way in case people haven't heard it. So I run Laser's Edge label. And around 1995, House of Music in West Orange, New Jersey, they closed their doors. And there was a bankruptcy sale for all of their gear, consoles, equipment, you name it, recorders. And there was a Mellotron for sale. And at the time, I knew what a Mellotron was, but I really didn't know what a Mellotron was. So I thought I did. And I thought it'd be a great idea to have a Mellotron in case one of my bands came over from Europe, like as if White Willow was going to do a tour of the US, and I'd have that Mellotron just sitting there
ready to go, right?
Right. So I went to the auction. It was in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, around Tribeca. And I saw the Mellotron, and I bid on the Mellotron, and I won the Mellotron for $800.
Hey.
Right. And then some guy came by and said, where are the tapes? Where's the tape rack? I said, what's a tape rack?
Oh no.
Oops.
Come on.
So I'm like, you mean, oh, that thing. So then I asked, and they said, no, we have the tape rack, and there's a road case too. But we have it's still back at the studio. And I don't know if any of you guys remember the House of Music. A lot of recordings took place there. So there was a lot of prog recording, all kinds of people, famous recordings took place there. And it was a nice old studio in West Orange, New Jersey. I drove there and I got the tape rack. They never found the road case. Road case would have been a nice thing to have.
Yeah, would have been.
And I came back with the tape frame, but no tapes. So I spoke to Dave Keene, who ran, I believe Dave's still around, who runs Mellotron Archives, and Dave was gracious enough to send me a fresh set of tapes, which I was supposed to cut and install into the tape rack. And I'm a klutz, and I don't know how to do that shit.
Yeah, that sounds hard already.
So right, I don't know.
Out.
So the reels of tapes sat in the top of a closet in a spare bedroom for a very long time, and the Mellotron, which got delivered to me, sat in the corner of my family room for years, for a number of years, and
This became a piece of furniture, right?
yeah, well, it was just sitting in the corner of the family room, and then we were renovating. We were doing a renovation of our powder room, and the plumbing supply place came to deliver a new sink, and the guy walks into my kitchen. He's standing there with a sink on his shoulder, and he stops in his tracks, and he says, "Is that what I think it is?" I said, "What do you think that is?" So he said, "Is that a Mellotron?" I said, "That's a Mellotron." So he was shocked, and I explained what I did for a living. And this is back in the days when I did printed catalogs. And I gave the guy a catalog. Never heard from him again. And the Mellotron sat there for about another year or so in the corner. And then Dave King called me one day. He said, "Hey, you want to sell that Mellotron?" And my wife looked at me, and she's shaking her head, "Yeah." And I made some money on it. I didn't it wasn't a huge windfall, but I made some money, and they came and they picked it up. And yeah, that was my dalliance with a Mellotron that I never.
Proud owner of a Mellotron. Hey, I've never.
Yeah, it was supposedly that Mellotron was on the first Peter Gabriel tour in '77. Wow. True, false? I don't know. So anyway.
So before we start, we should explain exactly what a Mellotron is. So it is a keyboard, but really it's the first ever sampling device.
Yes.
So basically every key on the keyboard triggers a reel of tape that has a specific sound on it. So there's different pitch selectors, right? You've got like brass and woodwind and however many other ones.
Brass,
so
ring,
wire.
Yeah. So each time you hit one of the keys, it then triggers this spool of tape that runs only for 8 seconds. That's the interesting thing. So every note you hit, you have up to 8 seconds to have that note play. So whenever you're listening to one of these old prog albums and you hear this burr noise, that's someone hitting one of the keys, the tape spool going, but it's only 8 seconds. So you got to do something right after that, something right after. Same thing if they hit a chord, right? All that sort of thing. If you hear like all these kind of crazy sounding flutes on some of these late 60s, early 70s albums, if it doesn't sound like a real flute, chances are it was a Mellotron, whether it be
everybody was using a Mellotron in the 70s.
Everybody.
You know, I point to like Aerosmith on Dream On. Heck, even Lynyrd Skynyrd used a Mellotron.
Yep.
Every studio had one.
Yeah.
And when they stopped using them, when digital keyboards came in, people were scooping up Mellotrons because the studios wanted to get them the hell out. They were in the basements. They just didn't know what to do with them. And now, real Mellotrons go for a fortune, and they're very difficult to maintain.
They are, yeah. They're very susceptible to like moisture and humidity and whatnot. But again, the reason why they became so popular is so bands and artists could basically replicate the sound of an orchestra or a string section without having to hire an orchestra or a string section. You basically had a Mellotron. You can kind of do all this. So you had the Beatles and all these other bands were using a Mellotron because it's a little bit cheaper, right? You go spend whatever it was at the time, $1,000, $800, whatever, on a Mellotron, and boom, you got your own little mini orchestra. But then when you want to go take it out on the road, it presents problems. Just like it's big, it's heavy, it's cumbersome. The tapes, you got to watch out with all the weather and the atmosphere conditions.
And apparently FM radio interference, and they were just real tricky little beasts.
Very susceptible. Now, what was interesting, when doing a little research for tonight, I discovered that the original Chamberlain Mellotron tapes were recorded by musicians from the Lawrence Welk Orchestra.
Really? Wow. Interesting.
Did not know that.
Yeah, and I know at one point Dave Keane I think he made fresh we made fresh recordings. So
Well, I think for a lot of people, the Mellotron is that thing that was made famous by the Beatles. Apparently, Mike Pinder from Moody Blues was an early employee of the Mellotron company, and I guess rumor has it he was the one that talked the Beatles into buying a Mellotron. Whether that's a true story or not, it's a cool story. I love it. And then you have the story of Tony Banks and the guys from Genesis buying King Crimson's Mellotron. These things were, pretty expensive back then, and there weren't that many made. So they were a real important piece of early prog history. And I look back and, as a kid, Pete, I didn't know it was like one instrument. I thought it was the fake strings, and I thought it was the fake woodwinds, and I thought it was the fake flutes. And then a little later on when I joined bands and stuff, and I realized, wow, that's all one instrument. And I realized I actually prefer the sound of fake flutes to real flutes. I prefer the sound of the strings on a Mellotron to a real string section. I just do. It just sounds better and more rock and roll, I guess,
Yeah, there's a charm to it, right?
Less tutti frutti, less Lawrence Welk, ironically enough.
it's disappointing when you find out it's
yeah. I should say so. You just bummed me out.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing how we prog fans nerd out to like something so simple as a Mellotron? It's crazy, right?
It's really dumb, right?
Yeah, it is, but and it's so funny because sometimes you hear people like, I don't know why you proggers give a shit about Mellotron. Who cares about the Mellotron? We care about the Mellotron. We do.
Yeah, it's the sweetest sound in God's universe, Pete Pardo.
I'm
telling you, nothing beats the sound of a Mellotron with perhaps 12-string acoustic guitar behind it. And come on, man, that's capital P prog right there.
Yeah,
you can't have prog without it. Keith Emerson, notwithstanding, who apparently despised the thing. Every other prog keyboard player worth his salt dallied with the beast at some point in time or another. You had to. It was just too awesome. You can't ignore that sound.
ELP took it on tour, on the Trilogy tour. They took one so they could play a band's Bolero. And Greg Lake was the one who was playing the Mellotron.
That's right. Yeah.
And apparently it only lasted like a few shows because the damn thing would keep going out of tune, and the tape would break, and it was they said, screw this, and they trashed it. Yeah, so listen, guys, if this goes over well, we get a lot of views. Will we be doing the Elka Rhapsody show and the Mini Moog show? And,
well, I can see a Hammond.
The VCS3.
Yeah, Hammond show.
Great Hammond organ record.
That would be a good show to do.
Yeah.
Well, the trio, the big trio, well, there's really four, right? There's the Mellotron, there's the Moog, there's the Hammond, and the Fender Rhodes, right? That's like the holy quartet of...
I'm up for it, man. If you guys want to do it, count me in. So I'm going to start with two, right? We're doing two first round. And I pulled out stuff. These are random. These aren't in any ranking or anything like that. In fact, I'm just intentionally kind of pulling stuff out. So the first one I got here, this is obscure. I believe this is 1974. It's from Australia. The band is called Rainbow Theatre. And the name of the album is The Armada. This was the first of two albums that they had. A lot of brass, a lot of Mellotron brass, just kind of opens up with it. You got... it's very reminiscent of early Crimson, and they were kind of an interesting band. This almost like a rock opera. A lot of people playing on this. Big brass section, a lot of different vocals, vocal harmonies. The lead singer, he's got this really kind of dramatic, like operatic quality. He's like a tenor. It's a bit different, and it's really cool. And this did get reissued on CD by, I think, Aztec Music, I think it was. They did a really nice job with it. The second one was called Fantasy of Horses. So that's the first thing I got.
Wow, good pull right there.
Next one is an old favorite. This is a band that I'm sure Nicholas would confirm that I tried to sign this band before they released their first album. Anecdote.
Yeah, there you go.
So this is Vimad, the first one. Anna Sophie Dahlberg was in charge of Mellotron. She was the Mellotronist, in addition to playing cello. Pete, you and I, we did the ranking, the anecdote, and this was our number one, right?
I believe so. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, tons and tons of Mellotron on this record. I mean, it's just very, very King Crimson influence, later King Crimson, and just dark, intense, and a magnificent album. One of my favorites.
All their albums are drenched with Mellotron.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love it.
Every single one of them is just a Mellotron lover's dream. And hey, the latest one even had a member of the church on it too, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that last album, that was a great album.
I like them all though, so I'm a little biased.
They need to make a new one.
Yeah,
We do.
So
Cool.
that's what I'm starting with.
All right, we're off to a great start. What do you got, Scott?
Right. Well, you think about the Mellotron, and oftentimes you think about a certain time period, but Andy Partridge decided he was going to bring that back, and there were Mellotron in a little bit of the previous XTC album, Murmur, but here you've got it on the Dukes of Stratosphere, left and right. Dave Gregory is just such an amazing musician. I believe he handled most of the Mellotron playing on this. So this is Andy Partridge and the boys just playing around, thinking that they're like the Electric Prunes or 96 Tears, question mark, and the Mysterians. But I really enjoy the Mellotron playing on here and the retro vibe of this. One of the great moments of like, you know what? It's the late 80s. Nobody's playing the Mellotron. We're playing a Mellotron right here, guys. And nobody was fooled for a second, by the way. I was working retail at the time. I got the promo. Geffen was being all, funny about it. I put it on the turntable in about a half a second. I knew it was XTC. So no one was fooled, but it's just an amazing record. So I'm going with the Dukes of Stratosphere 25 O'Clock. And another great Mellotron record. Again, you think of a certain time period, late 60s, early 70s, when prog was really cooking. But there were a couple records right towards the tail end. And I'm looking at England's Garden Shed, a late era, probably one of the last great records of that golden era. And Robert Webb and band. This is just such a great unheralded record. And it's got Mellotron all over it. And we love that. This is the like the golden edition or something like that. It's got some bonus tracks. I couldn't afford to get the original. There's no way. But I'm just happy to have it on vinyl. So those are my first two picks, the Dukes of Stratosphere and England.
I found the original copy of that album. It's a really strange story. I was in Miami. And it was in like the mid 90s. And it was just a record store that I was dragging my wife through. And they didn't.
You remember which one?
I think maybe it was Yesterday and Today.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this store didn't have much used albums. And it was a brand new copy that just was original on Aris that was just sitting in the bins for 20 years.
That was a great store, by the way.
Yeah, it was weird.
I love that store.
And it was just a brand new, unplayed original copy. So that band was about 3 years too late.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. They would have been a contender, I think, if they would have come out a little bit earlier.
Yeah, 77 is just it was way too late. No label was going to get behind a band like that in 77.
Yeah, 1977. Check, please.
Yeah.
All right, my first choice for today is a UK band. This album was released in 1971. It's their second album. The band is called Gracious. This is Gracious is the name of the album.
Yep.
All right. They only released 2 albums in the 70s, self-titled in this particular one right here. Then they reunited back in the 90s. Martin Kitcat is the mellotronist in this particular band. So it starts off with the epic Supernova Suite.
Yeah.
It's a really good song. There's Mellotron and organ everywhere. It's got nice heavy guitar riffing, pounding drums, kind of King Crimson soundish at times. And I love how they use the Mellotron as like a lead instrument in many spots on this album, which I think is really cool and kind of unique. You got a song called CBS's, which is kind of like Barclay James Harvest. You got What Comes to Be is you get that weepy, we use that term weepy Mellotron sound quite a bit. And then it's used like an organ on Blue Skies and Alibis, and then used like horns on Hold Me Down. So if you want to hear, we talked earlier about all the different sounds you can get on the Mellotron. If you want to hear it used in many different ways, using all the different sounds that are available in the tape library, this album's got it all. Really, really good stuff. That's my first pick for today. My second pick here might be the greatest Mellotron album of all time. Might be. Barclay James Harvest Live.
Oh.
I mean, I didn't want to pick any live albums for this, but I don't know how you can have the show and not talk about this record. I mean, all of their studio albums, especially the early ones, feature lots of Mellotron, but it's almost like the Mellotron is amped up to 11 on this album. Summer Soldier, it starts right off the bat. The opening notes of Summer Soldier. It never lets up from there. Wooly Wolstenholme, who just passed away, is one of the great Mellotron players of all time. He's the man all over this album. You got his Mellotron and John Lees' biting guitar leads. I mean, man, Medicine Man, Crazy City, After the Day, Galadriel, She Said, Paper Wings, Mockingbird. I mean, probably the greatest versions of all of these songs come from this album, and the most glorious Mellotron sounds ever laid to tape and recorded, I think, are on here. So yeah, if you don't have this record, you need it. So that's my first two.
Nice. Yeah, and I don't think their studio efforts really showed how powerful they were live. So that's why that record was always great. I never thought about it as the greatest Mellotron record. I just thought it was always a great live album.
It is. It's both, actually. Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and listen to it tonight.
There's so much Mellotron.
It's weird how they never gained traction anywhere other than Germany. You know, they were big in Germany. Even the UK, they weren't a big band. And I mean, they kept trying here. They kept putting out, Down to Earth, and they had, Time Honored Ghosts, all those albums, and they
very accessible albums, right? They had those great Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young vocal harmonies, and just I've never understood why.
And the Moody's influence and all that stuff. Yeah. And they never toured here.
No.
Yeah, that probably is the kiss of death right there. I mean,
for here, yeah, for sure.
In America, this market, if you're not going to tour it, yeah, the American audience isn't going to care. Especially you're talking about the 70s. Yeah. Even bands that toured incessantly had a hard time. Think about poor Gentle Giant, man. They were here all the time, and they still couldn't really gain a whole lot of traction in the U.S. market. So,
yeah.
All right, my next two. I'm dealing off the top of the deck.
There we go.
All right. I did make a conscious effort to try and touch on all the countries if I could. I want to share the wealth. So I'm gonna go home to Long Island. Cathedral, Stained Glass Stories. They were a Long Island band. They did covers, they did originals, and they stole from the best. Yeah. By the way, Greg Walker did that reissue, and I A-B'd it against this. That sounds very good. I slightly prefer the original.
I bet.
But that sounds quite good.
No, it doesn't sound bad at all, actually.
No, it sounds good.
I'm happy with it.
I think Bob Katz did the original mastering for that reissue. But the thing is, like those guys, they were clearly an influence on Engelgard, which I'm sure is going to get mentioned tonight. And as I said, very good band doing original stuff. There was absolutely no chance that they would gain any traction in the US, self-released. And a lot of Yes, a lot of Genesis, a lot of Gentle Giant. And Mellotron was just part of the deal. And there's a lot of it on here. So, got that.
You know what? I re-listened to, I love that album. I re-listened to that again yesterday for like the millionth time. It's so good.
It's amazing. I'm sorry. It's 10 out of 10, man. It's one of the better records.
100%.
If you're a prog fan, man, that scratches like every itch.
Every itch.
But to me, it was a little different. To me, even the avant-garde bands of the time were still thinking in terms of binary songwriting. Even if you look at a giant piece like, Supper's Ready or Close to the Edge, still really well structured. The song structures on Stained Glass Stories are just bizarre, man. It's this weird non-linear thing that's going on. Engelgard picked up on it and ran with it. And, to their credit, they obviously, give them, credit for the influence. But I love that Cathedral album, man.
They were like pulling all the different influences and kind of melding them together somehow.
Yeah.
So it was
awesome.
Good. So Pete, said that the Barclay James Harvest was live album was the best, possibly the best Mellotron album of all time.
Is that it?
I'm going to go with what I now will say is the best Italian progressive rock album of all time. Let's see if I. There we go.
There you go.
Jose Rosenbach, Zarathustra.
Yeah.
And well, they were for a long time. They were a one and done band. The keyboard player was a guy named Pete Pardo. The album opens up right away with Mellotron flute and strings. It's great singer Stefano Gallifi, very operatic, kind of like Francesco from Banco, and yeah, just an amazing record. The sidelong Zarathustra suite. Every time, you know, I have lots of Italian favorites. I have lots of Italian, and every time I put this one on, I think this is the one. This really is the one.
It is the one.
It's just, yeah.
It's special.
And Pete Pardo, he's fantastic. And he never made it, as far as I know, he never played on another album by anyone. I never saw his name come up.
And that album rocks, people.
Oh yeah. It's just fantastic.
Nasty distorted guitars. Stefan Lupo. Man, he's actually a fan of the Prague Corner. He watches the show, even though he doesn't speak that good of English. So we love him. And man, Zarathustra, absolutely my favorite Italian album. And if you like Mellotron, it's one of those records you gotta have. You gotta have it.
It's throughout the album. So you know, and that was the thing. You know, I don't want to like single out so much, like say, oh, you hear this and this and this, because it was just part of the keyboardist arsenal at the time. So stuff just crops up in places, you know. So those are my next two, right?
Cool. Yep.
Nice. Good. Well, you know, everybody's talking about this band Anecdoten and that other band Anglagard. I can't afford any Anglagard vinyl, but you knew this was coming. What is this? The spawn of Anglagard, I guess. It's all Traps on Earth, A Drop of Light. I love this album. I'm not a big Zool guy, so this is like perfect for me, right? It's got just a little Zool influence in there, but a whole lot of Anglagard and a whole bunch of Mellotron. Just drench this entire record. Gives it that eerie, creepy, melancholy kind of feel. The album cover really does sum up how the record sounds. It's really kind of dark and spooky, and the Mellotron can do that like no other instrument. You know, I just love this thing. Like I said, because I can't afford any Anglagard vinyl, someday somebody's going to reissue those albums. But you know, I am just happy that up in Norway, right next door, we've got another band that loves the Mellotron, and this guy Lars Fredrik Frøsli, he's just a master of all this vintage stuff. He's got both the Mellotron and the Chamberlain all over this album. I can't tell the difference, you know. Apparently, you know,
all good.
Real aficionados can tell, but I don't think there's a difference at all. But I love all 5 Wobbler albums. All 5 of them use a whole bunch of Mellotron all the way through. But this is their 3rd album, Rights at Dawn, and I'm just really digging this album right now. And to me, it kind of shows off the Mellotron the best of their 5 albums. And you know, we wanted to kind of keep it a little modern too, because we could show Foxtrot all day long and ooh and ah over Tony Banks's intro to Watcher of the Sky, but you know, everybody knows that already.
Yeah, for sure.
So Lars is a serious collector of analog keyboards.
Oh,
and
for sure.
When I put out Hinterland, I can't tell you how long it took to get him to finish that damn album. It just kept adding on and adding on and adding on. Oh.
That's too funny.
Yeah, I believe it.
One thing Scott just mentioned, which rings true, is there are some bands that you really can pick any album in their repertoire, and that's a really great Mellotron example. And that goes for this band, which has been mentioned a couple times already, and that's Sweden's Anglagard. I'm going to go with Hybris. If anybody here on the panel is going to pick any of their other 2 albums, I think that's a great choice as well, because all 3 of them are Mellotron classics. Thomas Johnson, Johann Hogberg play Mellotron on this particular record. I love the herky-jerky nature of their music. We mentioned Cathedral before. You can obviously tell they borrowed from them and maybe from Jethro Tull and King Crimson and Genesis and all the usual suspects. But man, brooding Mellotron throughout all this album, and mixed with the flutes and the acoustic and electric guitar and the Rickenbacker bass. I mean, Vandragar, I don't even know how to pronounce these things. Vandragarai, Vilsehet, or however you say it. Man, the Mellotron is just seeping all over the place on there. And what's great about this band is like they don't use it constantly throughout the entire song, but it like just pops out of nowhere right at the perfect time and just like totally kicks your ass. Then it disappears for a couple minutes, then it comes back again. I mean, it looms large everywhere on this album. And I would say if you really want to listen to a great Scandinavian band, really use a Mellotron. Well, we just heard about one of them. We might hear about some more. We heard two already because I don't want to forget Anecdote. But yeah, Engelgard must hear there.
Yeah.
And then next we're going to go to Germany. This album's from 1977. The band is called Epidaurus, Earthly Paradise. Their one and only 70s album. Gunther Henny and Gerd Linke both play Mellotron. So we got two Mellotron players here. Hammond organs on here, Moog, Fender Rhodes, clavinet, piano. You get a lot of lead Moog on actions and reactions, but then the Mellotron comes in the background and just kind of like hangs over. It's almost like, you got like the mountains off in the distance. And you got the clouds that kind of like just sitting at the top. That's the Mellotron, just kind of hanging over everything,
Nice imagery.
Yeah, that's the feeling I get whenever I listen to this album. It adds a total symphonic effect to Silas Marner, gets real ominous and creepy on Wings of the Dove, just mixes well with the Moog on Meta Mockstrom. I mean, just a really, really cool album. You got female vocals on here. This band is, I think, a little bit different when you listen to the way they arrange their songs than some of these other bands we're talking about, but still lots of really great Mellotron on this album and well worth checking out. Epidaurus. My second pick there.
Good call.
When at one point, I think I had about 30 titles on my
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I had Epidaurus on it.
Yeah,
it's a great. I never had an original on that. It's a great one. All right, I'm jumping over to France, and I love this band's first three albums, and the band is Pulsar, and this is their third album called Halloween. My favorite Pulsar album is probably Strands of the Future, their second album. That was the first one I ever got. I stumbled on it in Corvettes in Douglaston, Queens, and it was mind-blowing. But that one's like very, very spacey.
Yeah.
Halloween is a different animal. Opens with, you get the Mellotron strings, you get flute. It's very, very dark album. I guess it's a concept album. Very kind of ominous, and the Mellotron crops up here and there, man. And this album just has like a touch of evil about it. I mean, it kind of lives up to the title of Halloween. English vocals, but the accent is not so great. So you think it's English, and you guess it's English. I think it's English, but beautiful album. The first year after they kind of went off the rails a bit after the third album. So after this one. Touch and go. This is one of the great French prog albums, and like I said, I think I like Strands of the Future, just the spaciness of it. But this Mellotron album, I go with.
That's the better pick. Yeah.
All right, I'm going back to the UK. Beggars Opera. Waters of Change.
Nice.
And so, their first album was called Act One. Fine album. With this album, they added a woman named Virginia Scott, and she did some vocals, and she was the Mellotronist. And there's lots and lots of Mellotron. The great tunes here, Time Machine. I love that. Silver Peacock. It's all over this album, and it's just great record. The third album was Pathfinder, was pretty good.
I liked it too.
Yeah, it didn't have the Mellotron, if I remember correctly.
It did. There's no Mellotron on the first one.
Yeah, and then
first album is more Hammond organ, if I remember.
Yeah, it's all Hammond. There's no Mellotron on the first Beggars Opera.
The fourth album, I don't remember it being a very good record. So
no, it wasn't. It sucked. The first three, though, are highly recommended.
Yeah. And great vocals. And if I remember correctly, Martin Griffith is the vocalist, and I think his son is in a band or has a band. Maybe I'm gonna guess, and somebody please comment if I'm wrong. And God knows I'm wrong all the time. I think he's in his band is like Poor Genetic Material or something like that. English band, English neo-prog band, and I think Martin Griffiths is the father, and the son, whose name I don't remember.
Okay.
He did some kind of neo-prog band. That's my next two.
Time
Nice.
Machine is such a great song.
It's
Nice.
great.
Good
I mean,
call.
and it opens. I mean, it's just it's just a great opener. So yeah.
Good album.
Yeah, well, there was this rivalry between the Beatles and the Stones, and as far as the Mellotron goes, I think the Rolling Stones win. I just do. It's a cooler album cover. Look at that. And what are there, like Mellotron, like 4 tracks on this album, so it's good enough. I'm calling it a Mellotron album. It kind of gives this whole feeling for the whole album, right? And the name, there's Satanic Majesty's Request as a little kid. This album scared me, and the Mellotron just adds to that creepiness. So yeah, I'm going with the Rolling Stones. There's Satanic Majesty's Request. There's not Mellotron all the way through, and that disqualified a lot of albums that had like 1 or 2 really good Mellotron tracks, but that was it. So yeah, I had to take the cutoff at about that point there. And next up, I'm going with PFM. I could have gone with any of their first 3 albums that are really Mellotron drenched, but to me, Storios in un minuto, or however you say it in Italian, just amazing. PFM, probably the most well-known of the Italian bands, because they got signed to Greg Lake's Manicore label and did some English-speaking albums that just weren't as good, man. You need to stay with the Italian language. You need to stay with this one, Per Nemico, the Isla de LA, all that stuff. Unbelievable. Mellotron records. If you like the Mellotron and you don't know Italian prog, you got to do PFM. I mean, because Musea Rosenbach was already taken, but yeah, I absolutely adore PFM, and they actually got a lot more commercial when they got those English lyrics. So stick with the Italian. That's my next 2.
I remember the first 2 PFMs I ever bought with those 2 English language
Yeah,
albums.
me too.
And
I
thought
was
they were
like,
kind of cool.
yeah,
And
Italian prog.
yeah, and then I bought like one of the other ones from either Greg Walker or Ken, and I was like, oh, this is so much better. I've never listened to those English language albums ever since. Yeah,
I don't think I heard like any of the real Italian language stuff, because even Le Orme put out an English version, Maxophone. So I was hearing all those terrible English versions.
Yeah,
Contaminacion by Magdala de I can't even. Ruscio del Magdala. Man, I don't know any of these Italian. I'm terrible with the Italian, but they did an English version of that too. I heard all of those, and I didn't really like them. Yeah. I didn't hear any of the Italian versions until the 90s. And then I was like, wow.
Yeah,
my mind's changed completely.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I agree. Yeah. All right, let's go to the Netherlands for my next choice. From 1971, Earth and Fire, Song of the Marching Children. It's their second album. A guy named Gerard Coates is their Mellotron player. And he also contributes lots of Hammond organ on here. This is lush symphonic rock with a touch of psych in spots. You got the vocals, Journey Kegman, however it says. Really nice singer. A lot of flute on this album as well. Storm and Thunder, which is the 3rd track on here, is really where the Mellotron starts to kick in. But then it's featured like all throughout the big, 7-part epic title track, which is just full of ominous and haunting Mellotron sounds. I mean, just wonderful, wonderful stuff. I would say probably some of the best Mellotron sounds on a studio album contained in one song on that particular lengthy track. So yeah, that's my next choice. Earth and Fire, Song of the Marching Children.
Great album.
And then let's go to Italy, because there's lots to choose from Italy. Celeste, Principe di un Giorno from 1976. I mean, this is like a kind of like gut-wrenchingly beautiful album. Mellotron soaking throughout all of these songs, which is more of kind of like a folky type. There you go. Look at that. More of like a folk prog release, I would think. And you got two guys, Ciro Perino, if he's watching, because I know he watches the channel all the time. Ciro, how are you? I hope you're doing well. And Leonardo Ligorio, both play Mellotron on this album. Title track is just beautiful. It just got Mellotron paired off with flute, acoustic guitar, those lush Italian vocals. I mean, this album just kind of picks you up and sweeps you away. It's just so atmospheric and just beautiful. Favole Antiche. I'm going to try and do a little bit better Italian than you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
I should, because I am half Italian. I should be able
Oh, well, there you go.
you know, you got Mellotron flutes on here, which is cool, even though there is real flute on this album as well. Ghiocchi nella notte, another really nice piece, got piano and Mellotron, got some nice synths on this album. Just a beautiful, beautiful album. The first album from Celeste, Principe de un Giorno from 1976.
It's so weird how I actually love the sound of the fake Mellotron thing, you know, the fake flute thing, with a real flute in front of it.
Well, how weird is it that they would do that,
amazing.
right? Let's put some real
Why?
flute and some fake flute on here, right? Yeah,
It's amazing.
and you can totally tell when it comes in too. You're like, oh, that's flute-ish. That's the Mellotron right there. It's not.
Flute-esque.
There's a brand new Celeste album just came out.
Yeah, have you heard it yet?
No, I'm waiting for copies.
I love the artwork. Oh, it looks so good. I haven't heard it yet.
A band, you know, a version of the band, and he's been putting up pretty credible.
Yeah,
albums.
they've all been good. They've all been good.
Yeah,
They've been pretty nice. So, and Pete, so I'm gonna bail on this since you.
Okay.
I got a substitute.
Okay.
And
yeah.
and it was funny. Earth and Fire, Song of the Marching Children was on my list,
Oh, yeah.
but I have like a later reissue, and the cover's really ugly, even uglier than
Uglier
that
than
cover,
that.
which is pretty bad, right? The black cover. So I said, so I took it off the list. So, all right. So I'm gonna go with a substitute, and we're gonna go to Spain. Canarios,
Mm.
Good
Ciclos.
one. Yep.
So Canarios, they were originally Los Canarios. They were like a beat psych band. And I guess they were popular in Spain. They put out a few albums. And then they split, and the keyboard player, Teddy Bautista, he kept the name and he went full on prog. This is a double album. It's based on Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. It's epic sounding album, and female vocals. It's all in English, as I recall. And there's a generous amount of Mellotron on this record. So again, one of those albums where there's so much happening, you really got to listen, and it just kind of pops out at you, and hopefully when you don't expect it. And yeah, album that I don't think gets enough attention.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
And I'll save my two favorites for last. So we'll get this one out.
Mm.
So I knew
Yeah,
Scott would spooge when I.
Yeah, give me that. Give me that copy right there.
Yeah.
Look how beautiful the thing
This
is.
is Angligard's Epilogue, their second album. There's no bad Angligard. I prefer this one over Hybris because I think the production's a little better, and I think the vocals on Hybris are a little weak.
I don't like
Yeah, but everything that's good about Hybris is good about Epilogue, is good about Viljan Olga, and I just killed that title. I'm sure.
Zorga.
Yeah, whatever I said, and yeah, I mean, a band that wore their influences on their sleeve, and they stole from the greats, and kind of like Cathedral in a way. In fact, they stole from Cathedral. So Matthias Olsson, he did a collaboration with Tom Doncourt, who was the keyboard player from
R.I.P. Tom Doncourt.
Yeah, and just super intense band. If you ever got to see them live, they were able to pull it off live. And I don't know what now. There's like a new version of the band.
Yeah, Matthias is back.
Yeah, some of the old guys are back, and some of the old guys were kicked out. And,
Yeah, no Anna Holmgren anymore.
She's her and toured they're at the old folks home. And,
Well, I hope we see a new album, because I would love to hear it.
Oh,
yeah, and Scott talked about All Traps on Earth, so I think he was probably tired of waiting around. He did his own thing. Johann Brand, the bass player, he did his own thing, and All Traps on Earth was a phenomenal album.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Brought his
it's
daughter along too.
just my personal preference. And I remember going out to see them play at Prog Fest when Greg Walker put on Prog Fest, and sitting in the hotel room putting the CDs together, because they had gotten they brought the booklets and the tray cards and the CDs with them. And then I guess Greg got them jewel cases, and they were just sitting there putting the damn things together. And supposedly they sold like 1,000 that weekend.
I believe it.
So,
I believe it.
yeah. So anyway, those two.
Awesome. Awesome. Hey, for my next pick, this is a guy that used to rag on retro prog all the time. It's just so awful. These bands, it's not prog. You got to progress to prog, to call yourself progressive rock. Where's the progress, man? I hate all those retro prog bands. And then he puts out this. Come on, man. Steven Wilson, I absolutely love you. And this album is absolutely amazing. It is a 70s prog album through and through with, a few modern sensibilities thrown in there. But, Mellotron all over this thing. Yeah, I like truth and I like honesty. And this album is honestly a great album, and it's got Mellotron all over it. And, I'm going to tell a little tale of a little indie band, right? Pacific Northwest. It starts exploding, and Modest Mouse and Death Cab for Cutie and stuff like that. And there's this band out of Boise, Idaho. So they're called Built to Spill. They get signed by Warner Brothers. Their album that got them signed had like all these short little 2-minute snappy little songs. And their major label debut is this thing. And it's nothing but like 9-minute songs drenched in Mellotron and long guitar solos from Doug Marsh. It's perfect from now on. It's Built to Spill. It's actually shockingly one of the best Mellotron albums ever. I absolutely love it. Every song's got Mellotron on it. And I'm assuming Doug Marsh does most of it because, nothing tricky or nothing fancy. He's just, filling in the blanks, so to speak. But if I was an executive at Warner Brothers, I don't think I would have been real happy. But the end result was one of the best albums that came out of that whole scene. No, the best album that came out of that whole Pacific Northwest scene is this one right here. Perfect from now on, Built to Spill. Those were my latest 2 Mellotron picks. I thought I'd mix it up there a little bit, Anya.
Cool. I've never heard that. I will need to.
No, it's a great record. They're a cool band.
Put everybody's list down in the comments below so people can kind of copy and paste and go check some of these out. So, all right, let's revisit Wobbler again, shall we? Hinterland. Again, as we've said, you can pick any of their albums. They're all great. They all feature tons of great Mellotron from Lars Fredrik Froisley. He's got plenty of Moog on here, plenty of Hammond organ, clavinet, other keyboards. I mean, Roboto Industry has got Mellotron popping up and down all over the place. Clair Obscure, it's really creepy and cascading on that. Rickenbacker bass is on here, looping guitar. You can't go wrong with any song on here. It's absolutely classic. But then again, every album of theirs is classic. And after, let's see, I should have done and maybe we'll have to coordinate this better on the next go around, but we should always probably come with lots of alternates.
Yeah.
I didn't come up with enough today, but I did come up with one extra alternate, which I think, we have to mention this band at some point. I decided I didn't want to mention the obvious one. So let's go In the Wake of Poseidon by King Crimson from 1970, the second album, right? Pretty much kind of like rehashed ideas from the first album, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And there's some monumental Mellotron on this album, maybe not on every single song, but the title track is kind of like the sister song to Epitaph from the first album. Plenty of Mellotron there. And then for me, one of the great Mellotron songs of all time is the freaking Devil's Triangle, which has creepy, nightmarish Mellotron throughout the entire song. You won't hear Mellotron sounding any more frightening than on this particular track. And leave it up to Robert Fripp to be the guy to get some of the most evil sounds out of a Mellotron. And that's enough for me to include this album on this list, In the Wake of Poseidon, King Crimson. But any of those early King Crimson albums up until the Red Album have tons of Mellotron, and they're all worthwhile checking out.
Definitely.
Did you just do 2?
What's that?
Did you just do 2?
Yep, I did too. Yep, Wobbler and King Crimson.
Well, I forgot well. Okay, so my last two, right?
Yep.
So I'll get this one out of the way. This is maybe for some, this is the most famous of the Mellotron albums, Spring.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So because I'm a poor man, I had to I sold my original British copy, which we used when I did the CD. We used it for the cover, and it sat in my collection. Then it became a museum piece, and it was just so rare and so expensive. I was afraid to play it, so I sold it on eBay and made a fortune from it. And it kind of left a little hole in my heart. So for years, I've been thinking about reacquiring a copy, and the British copies are crazy expensive. The German copies are just slightly crazy expensive. The New Zealand pressing, it's kind of shitty looking, but it was pressed from the British stampers, and it sounds amazing, and it's much more reasonably priced. Still crazy expensive, but you know. And I got it. I got it about a month or so ago, and I got to tell you, I played this record. It felt great. It just felt great, and the CD I put out sounds fantastic. So the story with Spring, everybody would say that there were three Mellotrons on the album. That's bullshit. There was one Mellotron, but there were three guys in the band in Spring that were playing the Mellotron at different times. And there's Mellotron, all the different voices you can imagine featured throughout the album. Great singer Pat Moran. Pick Withers was the drummer. He went on to play in Dire Straits. And just great record. I don't know, proto prog, Pete. What? How would you?
Yeah, it's very straightforward arrangements, but it's got that kind of like Moody's, Barclay James Harvest, Cressida type of thing going on.
Yeah.
Sounds like
Nothing
an
overly
early
complicated.
Vertigo, right?
Well,
Yes.
yeah. So this was well, you can't tell from this version because of the, but this was released on RCA Neon, and RCA Neon. Olaf Wiper, he was the guy who ran Vertigo, and then he left Vertigo and he went over to, which was Polydor, I guess it was at the time.
Yeah.
And he went over to RCA and he started his own label, which was Neon, which was the competitor to
Right.
Vertigo. And they did and Olaf, I actually spoke to Olaf Wiper. I don't think he's alive anymore, but when I was researching this and tracking it down to reissue it, the yeah, I spoke to him briefly. There was Raw Material. There were a lot of interesting bands. Chris McGregor's Brotherhood of Breath, pretty eclectic stuff, and directly comparable to what he had accomplished with Vertigo. So these bands were they were like interchangeable.
Very much so. But
and I had to say, if I could just talk about it just a couple of minutes, doing this album was one of the best things I ever did in terms of just self-satisfaction, because that was an album, I've been a crazy record collector since I'm 16 years old. And then I got into the whole CD thing, and Spring had been bootlegged by a German label called SPM, and everybody wanted a legitimate CD reissue of it. And everybody talked about it, and I didn't understand why there wasn't a reissue. I thought, well, it's gonna, the rights are, nobody knows who owns the rights, nobody has the tapes or whatever. So here's something that people need to know. If you ever, if you want to do a reissue label and you want to do it right, follow the publishing. The publishing is the key, okay? Because the publishers know where all the bodies are buried. And I made a phone call. There used to be a book called the Billboard International Buyer's Guide, which had a list of all the music publishers, all the record labels, phone numbers. That's how I started doing reissues. I used to get that book, and I used to get on the phone, and I called Germany and call wherever, and I get the rights to this stuff, and I get the master tapes. So Spring was like a challenge for me. It took me 15 minutes, and I had a deal.
Wow.
So I found the publisher, Bucks Music in the UK, and I called, and they said, fax. This is no email. Fax us a proposal, and I faxed the proposal, and some years later, some weeks later, I should say, box of tapes showed up, and I was with Bob Katz. He had his at the time had his studio on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, I should say, and sat in on the mastering session, and it was a blast. And there were 3 extra songs which were not on the album, and 2 of them were tunes that were targeted to be on the second Spring album, and then the other tune was supposed to be the B-side of a single or an EP that never happened. So we had all this extra material. We put it out, and we did very well with it. And interesting story was, which doesn't get told in the booklet or anywhere, it was Rockfield Studios, where the album was recorded, was owned by 2 brothers, Kingsley Ward and Charles Ward. And they had a serious split, and they didn't talk to one another. And Charles never went to Rockfield, and Kingsley wouldn't talk to him. And Charles owned the rights to the second Spring album. And the problem was Kingsley had the tapes, and he had the multi-tracks, and the album was never fully mixed. And he had the multi-tracks, and they were buried somewhere there, and I would have had to pay him to dig them out, and then the album had to be mixed, and it would have been done for his brother, who he didn't get along with. So ultimately, the second album got bootlegs. So there was cassettes floating around, and then when Esoteric did a very nice reissue, I sorted it all out, and I guess that second album was done from rough mixes. But anyway, Pat Moran became the house engineer. Spring made the one album essentially, and then Pat Moran stayed at Rockfield, and he became the house engineer there. Worked with Van de Graaff Generator, may have done live sound for Van de Graaff, I'm not sure. And then he became a very famous producer. He produced Robert Plant's first couple of solo albums, I think. And then he did a lot of hair metal bands and what have you. He passed away about 10, 12 years ago. He had a degenerative disease. So that's my long, boring.
Nice.
Story.
That makes sense. That Spring. I always heard Spring. Yeah, that's the band with 3 Mellotron players. I'm picturing this band on stage with 3 Mellotrons. And that makes a lot more sense. What band had 3 Mellotrons back then?
I take it personally, because I always see like people on like Facebook, and there's always somebody talking about Spring saying, oh, they had 3 Mellotrons. And I always feel compelled to say, no, that's bullshit. It was 1 Mellotron. And I know that, Pat Moran told me, we had Pat was in New York, and my wife and I had lunch with him one day. Very nice man, very helpful. It was really cool because all the photographs that we put in the booklet were taken by a guy who was like the roadie or friend of the band. And he became years later, he became Pat's Mercedes mechanic. And he had saved all the photographs that had never been seen before. So wow. I still have some photos that I think were never published, hiding in a box somewhere. So that's my Spring story. And it's just a very, very personal album for me. And I think as far as a Mellotron album, it's one of the top 2 or 3. I mean, it's one of the great ones. And my last one is the album, which for me, again, very personal and probably my favorite Mellotron album. And I think the best Mellotron album, Symphonic Pictures.
I knew it.
Yeah, I mean, this was just an amazing, amazing album. And if you like Engelgard.
What's that? Schick Freuling and Führers? How do you say it?
Schicke Führers Fröhling. So Gerd Führers passed away. He was, unfortunately, he was hit by a car, I believe. There was a car accident. He passed away. And if you like Engelgard, start here, because a lot of Engelgard came from this album, Symphonic Pictures. Great record. You got the Mellotron strings, the flute, the choirs. It's throughout. The sidelong track Pictures. It's just a mind fuck. It's just an incredible record. They made two fantastic records and one not so fantastic record. And you know, they were great. And supposedly Zappa was supposed to produce their first album, but that didn't work out.
Wow.
It didn't matter. It's a great record.
It's a great record. And I guess Schick left or something, and then they put out a couple records, and then he came back, and then the other one left. They got a little convoluted, but
it was Eddie Schicker, the drummer. He left, and so Fures and Froling made a great Mellotron album, actually, called Ammerlin, which is very different, very more acoustic based, and not much percussion on it. And then they made other Fures and Froling albums, which were kind of sad.
Yeah. Now the magic was gone.
Yeah. And then Gert was gone, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Symphonic Pictures just amazing. Ken, you were talking about albums without a whole lot of percussion, and here's an album from a band. I kept hearing about this Canadian band. Their second album just kept getting all these accolades, way up there in Prague Archives, top 100 all time. And I listened to it, and there's not a stick of drumming on it, man. I'm like, what in the world? It's harmoniums, the 5 Seasons. I hated this thing. Pete, I hated this album for the longest time. Where are the drums, man? And this isn't rock and roll. So I tried the third album, which has some drums. And then I realized, these songs are good. So I went back to this and I realized, man, I was just a big dummy. This album is amazing. It's full of amazing folk-like melodies, but the Mellotron is never that far behind. And the artwork, anytime I can show this harmonium, it's just an amazing record, an amazing time. Quebec had a whole scene going on in the 70s where there were so many of these progressive bands selling a ton of records in Quebec in particular, but I guess throughout Canada. And lastly, my final pick, somehow, some way, I'm always going to put Neil Morris into my equation. And I could have picked any of the first 6 Spock's Beard albums. There's plenty of Mellotron on all of them, but why not go with The Light, where it all began? And I don't have to distinguish whether it's Rio or Neil playing, because this is all, Rio wasn't in the band yet. So all the Mellotron you hear, all the keyboards you hear here, Neil Morris, this is where the legend began. I'm a huge Neil Morris fan, so I'm super biased, but I just really think that his Mellotron playing is so perfect in that he was a big student of everything Wakeman was doing, everything Tony Banks was doing, and he incorporated all of that into what he was doing with, maybe like a modern American pop rock sensibility thrown in. And what do you get? You get Spock's Beard, a great album, a great Mellotron album. And that was my final pick.
Awesome. Yeah, The Light is great.
Yeah.
It's still my favorite Spock's Beard album.
I love them all, man. I even like the Nick albums. I like the Ted albums. I'm just a fan.
I Beware of Darkness might be my favorite, but I think The Light is spectacular. They're all good. Yeah, a lot of great albums. Nick.
What a time, It was this weird time when all of a sudden all this prog started appearing. We mentioned Angligard and Anecdote and Spock's Beard, and you had the Flower Kings and Glass Hammer, and all of a sudden it's just and our ears were kind of pricked up because we'd been used to kind of the prog metal thing that had been going on since the late 80s. So I was ready for something a little bit less metally and more proggy, and then bam, I'm hearing Mellotron again. I'm like, yeah, Spock's Beard, here we go.
So my last 2 have already been mentioned, but we'll mention them again. I also picked Cathedral Stained Glass Stories. Just absolutely terrific album. And do they look the part? I think they do.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Sure, why not? And then I also picked Museo Rosenbach as well. And I had England Garden Shed sitting on the sidelines too, just in case. So a few of us were on the same page with these. These are all great albums. We'll try on our next episode to not duplicate any.
We didn't duplicate as much as I thought we would.
No, we didn't really. Yeah, I only came with one extra. I should have came with a couple because I had some on my list, but I didn't pull them. So yeah, that's all right for next time.
I had 30 pulled, so I was ready. I didn't know what to expect today. I've been digging through albums this whole time. Where is he? I'm just digging.
These assignments and things like that, I enjoy them. You get to hear parts of your collection that you don't always get to hear because there's just, for me, there's always so much music coming in, that I have to listen to. And then the stuff I'm buying that I want to listen to. And some of the old stuff, it just kind of sits on the shelf. So it's nice to.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how Pete does it. I'm real selective with the albums I review, but Pete reviews so many albums every week. It's where do you find time to listen to anything but the new albums that you're reviewing?
It gets harder and harder. Yeah, it does. Yeah,
it's a cyborg. He doesn't sleep.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe that.
So we'll make sure to get everybody's picks down in the comments below and I will say, if you're watching this show and you really don't know what all the hubbub is about when it comes to Mellotron, listen to any of these albums and you will discover why we love the Mellotron so much. That's kind of the point of doing this whole exercise. And if you have some Mellotron favorites, list them down in the comments below, and we'll see you perhaps in a few weeks for another episode of this, all about the Mellotron. And till then, do you fellows want to give a little plug to what's going on? Ken will be on the Professor's Picks coming up on Friday. That's his plug.
Ken's always around.
My only plug is this. People have been waiting for the new Agusa album, and it was going through customs and FedEx Health the past week. They're going to be delivered tomorrow. So we're filming this Wednesday. So it'll be up on the website at some point tomorrow, Thursday the 16th.
Cool. That's
Noir, the motion picture soundtrack, the brand new album from the one and only Agusa. Sell it, Ken, man. It's exciting. New Agusa.
Yeah, and the new one from Magic Brother, Mystic Sister, Tarot Part 1. So, Pete, did you get to listen to that yet?
I have not, but
you'll like it. I think
really good.
We'll talk
really
about
good
it.
record.
Talk about it on Friday.
I like their first album too. But Pete, we just wrapped up Clickbait Week over on the Prog Corner, where everything that I did was specifically designed to get as many views as possible. And, part of me wanted it to fail. Sadly, it's been nothing but a success. So you people are just incentivizing me to do more of the same later. But I promise we're going to get back to prog rock content this week, starting with the Sunday prog stream, which we do every Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern. To this Sunday, it's going to be Pink Floyd's top 10 songs. And it's an all-star panel. And who knows, maybe one day we'll get a Ken Golden or a Pete Pardo on the Sunday prog stream. Who knows?
Cool. And I do want to thank the Prog Corner viewers for voting Sea of Tranquility their second favorite YouTube channel, only bested by classic rock. That kind of hurt, but
I know, right? I was shocked. I would have bet, Pete, I would have bet money you would have been number one.
That's okay. Hey, number 2 is pretty good too, so that's okay. But he does a good job over there. He's gotten very witty with his shows of late. So that's
he's good. He's good at what he does.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it was good to see all the people that were represented.
Yeah, that was a fun show.
Fun jobs. Yeah.
Clickbait Week is gonna happen again soon.
There you go.
You got to do like Andy Edwards did, just eat your breakfast. Or what? Didn't he do a show like that?
He's crazy, man.
Like eating trumpets or muffins or something like that.
He was just sitting there eating.
Andy was number 3.
He's crazy.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Coming up on the channel tomorrow, of course, is Monsters Den Night. Tune in. We're going to be talking about we're revisiting films that are 30 years old here in 2024, picking out our favorite horror films from 1994. Friday morning at the Funhouse with Martin Popoff. Ken will be back for the Professor's Picks also on Friday. Saturday, UK Connection. Saturday, also the next episode of New Wave of Traditional Heavy Metal with myself and Rich Catino. And then Sunday, we're talking about Mellotron. There's no Mellotron on ranking the albums of Firefall coming up on Sunday. So a little
sure about that?
That sort of thing. But yeah, we do all sorts of crazy shit here on SOT. So till then, For Scot Lade and Ken Golden, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching us here on this episode all about Mellotrons. We'll see you next time for another one. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.